So hi everyone, good afternoon. Welcome back to session 2. And today we will be talking about FHIR Restful APIs. Uh, so this is about me, and I'll not take much time here. We'll just go to the next important section, and this is about the acknowledgements and credits. So the slides that I've prepared are not completely mine. The slides borrow heavily from the efforts of the community. And to name some, these are the names which have contributed to multiple slides, and I have taken a lot of inputs from different slides. Okay, agenda for today. So agenda for today is we are going to look at what is FHIR RESTful paradigm, what are FHIR RESTful APIs, right? Try to get a look at the specification and also try out some APIs on test servers, okay? So with that, let's have the housekeeping in place. Please be on mute. Uh, One thing is, please put your full name in the participant list so that while you're typing in the questions or while you're putting in something in the chat, the person who is monitoring can understand and we can understand who is asking, right? Ask all your questions on Zoom chat, follow up the discussions in the forum. And I still see a lot of people not joining the forum. And that is one of the reasons why we miss out on the discussions, the pre-reads, the information that is getting shared, and also like the timings and other things, right? So there should be one mechanism where we all can chat, and that's the forum, right? So please do join the forum. I have, in interest of everyone, I have actually sent invites to everyone, right? All you have to do is just accept the invite and you are in, right? So that's done. Anyone who has not received the invite, just put in the chat and you will get the invite. All right. And this is the link. Link is also there in the chat. The first chat for today is the link. Okay. So with that, moving on. So about this course, and this is just a context setting. So the FHIR India community is a community effort, and the idea is like, how do we accelerate the understanding of various standards, particularly FHIR in the community? How can people get up to speed and start developing on FHIR? So with that, we said like, let's have a community-driven approach where the community comes forward, takes the designs the courses, runs the courses, does whatever they want to do, right? And so I am just initiating this. So this is the first of a series of things that will come. So the first 5 sessions are I have volunteered to do it, but the remaining sessions or the further sessions, please feel free to volunteer for it, propose what sessions you want to take, and also if you want to actually structure it or recommend anything, please go ahead and do it. It's all us, it's community, right? So it's everyone together. All right. This course is designed to get people started onto FHIR, right? So that's the basic concept. That's the thought process with which we designed this course. Just how do we get people to get started on FHIR? And when I say people, the people can be from all diverse aspects, right? They can be developers, they can be doctors, they can be implementers, business analysts, policy makers, anyone, right? How do we make sure that everyone has a shared understanding of HL7 FHIR standard, and how can they get started on the standard? Because not everyone will have the same requirement, but everyone needs to know the standard to make better decisions, right? So how do we get them started? So that was the thought process. The focus is on understanding the important concepts. Focus is on understanding the fundamentals, right? Not basically, we are not going to understand or not going to do very advanced things, but we are going to lay our foundations solid so that on that, it's very easy to build up, right? What we have envisioned is like it is not going to be 5 sessions, but it is actually going to be 1 month worth of learning. If every one of us starts participating in discussion forums, starts doing assignments, starts discussing concepts, then it's actually a month-long learning, and we can actually get a lot out of it. But it's again up to the participants, right? So it's a continuous learning. Please note, this is a community initiative, and which means that these training does not replace any of the official training that is provided by HL7. All right. So course layout, we have seen there will be 5 sessions for this particular course. And these are the 5 sessions. We are in session 2. Session 2 is about FHIR Restful APIs. After this, the third session will be about resources, then conformance and terminology. And then the final session would be about implementation, right? So where we will see, like, if you have to actually do an implementation, what all things you should be considering. And if needed, we can go to with more sessions. But right now the plan is 5 sessions. The sessions are around 60 to 90 minutes in duration, and they are virtual. What we observed last time was, like, though the session ended in 90 minutes, we had a discussion which went on for another 60 to 80 minutes. So we are okay with it. So everyone, if people are there, we can even continue the discussion longer. All right. So before we start, it's important to know what is FHIR India community. So FHIR India community is a community of interoperability enthusiasts who are focused on learning and doing and making things happen on interoperability, specifically FHIR. We have a social media handle called social media tag FHIR India, and we have a discussion forum, and we have a LinkedIn group also. Our target is that by 2021 December, if we can become 10,000 by members, right, we can actually achieve a lot of things. We can actually push, we can actually take initiatives to completion, and we can actually do a lot of things for the country. So again, everyone is invited. Please, from your side, push actively to help people join this community. And this community is all about giving to each other, all about learning, sharing, and building together. Okay. Now we get to the meat of the session. The session starts. So we start with a recap of the first session. In session 1, we talked about interoperability. So we understood what is interoperability, why interoperability is needed, right? So the basic definition of interoperability that we talked last week was that interoperability is the ability of 2 or more systems or components to exchange information and to use the information that has been exchanged. So this was the fundamental concept that we understood last week. Then we also talked about the different types of interoperability, the different layers of interoperability, and how all these things come together to actually enable us interoperable ecosystem, right? So technical interoperability is all about machines talking to each other, the standards, the TCP/IP layer, all the things. Very important layer, right? The semantic layer of the data layer is actually about the meaning of the information exchange. That's the data layer. The process and the clinical interoperability, or the human layer, is actually the ability of people to use the data to fulfill their function, right? So a doctor is able to perform his role better with the help of data that he has received. So that's the clinical interoperability. And the last one is, there needs to be an institutional layer which actually promotes, or which actually enables interoperability. It can be the company culture, it can be the business culture, it can be education, it can be regulations, like the government pushing for data exchange, incentives, like what we are seeing now in most of the countries, right? So all these things come together to actually build interoperable ecosystem, right, where everyone gains. And none of these are more important than the other ones, right? So just keep that in mind. All these things come together, and then only we build an ecosystem. And last but not the least that we learned of is interoperability is only possible if we have standards, right? And that's where FHIR comes in. FHIR is one of the standard which actually promotes data exchange, and it tries to convey the preserve and convey the semantic meaning of the data being exchanged. So what is FHIR? FHIR is an acronym. The full form of it is Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. Fast, again, is a relative term. What it means is it's faster to work with FHIR than previous standards or the current paradigms that exist. That's the fast. It's not fast in absolute terms. It's not fast in Usain Bolt terms. It's fast, relative fast. Okay, so instead of months, now you can do things in weeks. If you used to do things in weeks, with FHIR, you should be able to do it in days. That's the relative fast that we are talking about. Healthcare is healthcare because it is in healthcare. Interoperability is again just all about data exchange. And resources is the concept that we are going to see in the next session. But resources are important because FHIR, when we see the foundation principles of FHIR, FHIR has based itself on the RESTful paradigm, right? And it talks about resources as the unit of exchange. So we'll see that. So all these things we looked last time. And the last line is where you can find the spec. All right. We also discussed about the FHIR manifesto and why it is very important, because this is standard, or this HL7 FHIR spec actually talks about focusing on implementers, focusing on people who are actually going to implement, enabling them, enabling the vendors, enabling the clinicians, enabling the policymakers to actually implement things. So the focus on implementers. So what it means is that actually the standard is not just a written spec. It has actually code, it has test samples, it has libraries, it has, as you see, like there are a lot of trainings and all these things, so that the implementation becomes easy, right? So that's the first focus of FHIR. The second is like target the most common scenarios. And this is a learning from the past, from HL7, right? So in the past, HL7 V3 tried to model everything, right? And we all know that that standard, the old standard, became, though it became very comprehensive, it became very tough to implement, right? So the change here is actually focus on most common scenarios, right? And the famous rule that FHIR goes with is the 80-20 rule. Only if something is applicable in 80% of the scenarios, that becomes part of the FHIR core spec, right? And so that's the common scenarios. So what it means is the FHIR resources, FHIR spec becomes lightweight because it is not addressing the corner cases. It's only addressing the most common scenarios, right? The third one is do not reinvent the wheel. Use what is available. Use industry web technologies. So what it enables is it actually enables cross domain expertise. Like, so anyone who is a programmer, anyone who has built websites or built web applications, right, should be able to just build apps on FHIR, right? So enable that so that you don't have to invest heavily on proprietary technology, right? Just run of the mill technology so that you have wide expertise, you have wide, so if there is some problem, then there is a large pool of people to solve it, right? So that's why focus on cross-industry web technologies. Human readability at the base level of interoperability. What it means is any resource you take in FHIR, it has a narrative section in there, right? So the baseline is like, at least when you are exchanging the resources, they should be able to be read by a human, right? So that you can distinguish if there is an error or not. And the last but not the least, make the content freely available. Support multiple paradigms and architecture. What it means is actually FHIR does not emphasize a particular architecture. right? So that you should be designing applications only this way. No, there is uh, no no recommendation or no guidelines on how you should be building your architectures. FHIR supports four paradigms, and they are RESTful APIs, REST, and then there are documents, then there are SOA, and then message. Right. So today we will be focusing on the REST paradigm. Okay. So with that, we come back to the topic of the day, and that's the FHIR RESTful APIs. So before we progress, I'll just check if there is something on the chat. Avanti, anything on the chat that we should address?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes. There is a question, but I think we should take that in the QA session. It's regarding the compliance on FHIR. So,
Okay.
is it okay?
Fine. Yes.
Or you want to
Yes.
answer it right now?
No, no. We will take all the questions at the end. Only the questions which are for the sections that are covered, we can take it now. Okay.
Okay.
So thanks, Avanti. So with that, we get into today's session, and that's FHIR RESTful APIs. All right. So in order to understand FHIR RESTful APIs, it is important, or it helps to understand like what's the genesis of FHIR, right? So how FHIR came into being, right? And this is just a historical perspective, and you can read more about it on the Graham's blog that is given below. The URL is given below, right? So what happened was like in 2011, HL7 said like, if we had to redesign everything, what would it look for the modern world, right? How would the health interoperability standard look, right? And that was the genesis of FHIR. So there was a fresh look task force that was formed, and that task force actually looked at the different approaches. They looked at how the other industries are solving interoperability, and then actually they've zeroed upon like the restful approach of interoperability. And their one of the inspiration was the high rise from the 37 signals, right? And first of all, there was a fresh look proposal that was published, and then it was called Resources for Health. And there they actually talked about the RESTful paradigm. And from there, actually the FHIR kicked off, right? So RESTful Resources for Health was accepted, and then the team started working on that. So that's the a brief summary on how it started. So I think this is for engineers. It is for engineers REST. They would be knowing REST, and for others, we will just go through the basic principles of REST, so that when we are talking about RESTful APIs, we understand what we are talking about and why RESTful, right? So for engineers, again, it will be a good thing to rehash your memories, right? So the REST principles, the basic principles are first uniform interface. So what it means is if you are going to access a resource, right, it should be uniformly addressable, right? And that's the concept where URIs and URLs came in. So that's a uniform interface, number one. So there should be uniform interface to access resources. Second is stateless transaction interaction. So what it means is the server need not worry about maintaining the states of the transactions. So the clients take the full responsibility of how they interact with the resources, right? So that's the stateless interaction. Cacheable, the responses and the data should be cacheable. RESTful principle assumes that there will be a client and a server. The server will be actually serving the resources, and the client will be making doing operations on those resources. And the last one is the layered system. So what REST says is it should not matter like to the client how they are getting the resources. So there could be one server which is serving the resources, or there can be 10, an army, a cluster of servers or an army of servers which are serving the resources to the client. So the layered system says the client should not or the client should not have to worry about how the resources are coming to them, right? So that's the layered system, right? So these are the basic REST principles that we should be keeping in mind. And then now we see what is RESTful FHIR or RESTful FHIR. Yeah. So this is just the full form of REST, representational state transfer. So the first principle of RESTful FHIR paradigm is represent your data as resources, right? So that's number one. Data is represented as resources. What are resources? Resources are the atomic unit of exchange. And you can think resources like patient, encounter, uh, practitioner, observation, all these things which are an entity in themselves, they are resources, right? So represent your data as resources. That's the principle. Make your resources URI addressable. So every resource should be able to be accessed through an URI. Okay, URI or URL, you can interchange the words, right? Then use HTTP methods to perform CRUD operations. So what is CRUD? CRUD is create, read, update, and delete. So what RESTful FHIR paradigm says is use HTTP methods. So when we are doing HTTP also has post, put, get, delete kind of verbs, right? So how do we use HTTP methods to do the operations on resources, right? So for example, if you have to get if you have to get a resource or get patient information from a server, right? You use HTTP get and then the URI of the resource and you get it. We'll see that, right? So, so far three principles. First, data as resources. Resources are URI addressable and HTTP verbs are used to do operations, right? Then the operations which actually FHIR adds to the normal HTTP methods. We'll see that. Okay, and then resources may be exchanged in different formats or representations. Today, FHIR supports XML, JSON, RDF, and NDJSON. So today we will be working with XML and JSON, but the other things, RDF and NDJSON, you can experiment. RDF is a turtle format I have not seen much in use, and NDJSON is new line delimited JSON where like all the resources are in one line, and I have seen it being used in bulk data transfer, right? So the bulk FHIR spec is using NDJSON. Okay, so now we talk about the example use case where we see FHIR can fit in very well, right? And not just FHIR, the FHIR RESTful paradigm we are talking about. So suppose there is a patient who goes to a clinic and then there is from the clinic that patient has to do some lab tests, and then the patient also has to get prescriptions, and maybe the patient is not getting well and he or she needs to be admitted to the hospital, right? So very simple use case that I have taken to demonstrate. And what we can do is we can just put FHIR servers on all the four places, right? So the clinic has a FHIR server, the hospital has a FHIR server, the pharmacy has a FHIR server, and the lab has a FHIR server, right? Now, if all these guys are having a FHIR servers, then what they can do is the data exchange can happen just like you are doing Twitter or a Google or a Facebook kind of an exchange, right? So for example, the clinic needs to uh, uh, raise a request to do a lab test. It can just post a service request, and the lab, when it is ready, the diagnostic report gets back to the clinic. And mind it, this is all distributed in different locations, different geographies, right? So keep that in mind. That's where HTTP and the web is coming into play, right? We are no longer restricted by the boundaries of the organization. As long as internet is accessible, you should be able to work with FHIR, right? Then the clinic actually sends a prescription and actually validates the prescription. And maybe the clinic, the doctor then refers the patient with all the medical documentation to the hospital. And the hospital, when it discharges, it gives back the discharge summary to uh, the doctor to actually do the follow-ups, right? All this can happen without the hassle of patient worrying. Patient can be actually staying at home, right? And patient need not worry about the data exchange, right? So patient gets treated and the data exchange happens, right? So patient need not worry. So that's a very, very simple use case, but that demonstrates the power of uh, web-based RESTful data interchange. Okay. All right. So before we get into practicals, I just wanted to cover this particular slide, and then we will see some RESTful interchanges, right? So, and this is again a base level, a fundamental concept, right? So FHIR APIs or FHIR RESTful APIs that we are talking about, they are at three levels: the instance level, the type level, and the system level. Okay, so we'll start with the system level. So system level is can also be seen as server level, right? At a server level. So any operation or anything that is all the services that can be provided at the server level are actually classified in system level. Example can be getting the capability statement of this particular FHIR server, right? That is a server level or system level operation, right? Getting the history of all the resources in the server, that's there. Mr. Khalid, can you please not do this? Thank you. Uh, Batches and transactions, right? They also happen at the server level. We'll come to see what is a batch and a transaction. Then comes the type level interaction. Type level interactions are where you are talking, where you are interacting at a resource type level, right? For example, you are creating a patient. You are searching for a certain type of a patient, right? Or you're searching for all the patients, history of all the patients, right? That got uh, into that server, right? So that's the type level operations, right? So where you are working at the type level, not at the individual instance level. Individual instance level is like where you are actually working with a specific patient, right? So you are reading or getting a specific patient, you are updating a specific patient, you are deleting and updating specific patient. So those are instance level operations. So in short, there are three levels where you can see the FHIR services being supported. System level, that's at the server level where the capabilities of the server, the batch transactions and other thing can happen. Type level, where the create and search can happen. These are just examples. And then the instance level where we actually work with individual objects like update patient named Satyam or create a patient named Satyam, right? So that's in here. Okay. So let's see what I mean to say. And so a typical FHIR URL looks like this. It has a base address, it has a type, and it has an ID. So this is the base address. Base address is actually the server address where the FHIR is hosted, right? So that's the base address. That does not change. For a server, the base address is fixed always. Okay, so this is the base address. Then comes the type. Okay, so type is actually, you can map the type to say FHIR resources. So all the FHIR resources can be considered as a type. Okay. And then finally is the ID. ID is the identification of that particular type. So in this case, what it notes is patient with ID 1234. Okay. So that's how it is. Okay. So now with this, what I'll do is I'll just go to a demonstration. Okay. So how many of you have already done downloaded Postman? Okay, I assume most of you have done, but even if you have not done, do don't worry. I'll just show it what's there. And then also, I have already shared the collection in Zulip. So you can try it out later also, right? So today what we'll see is we will understand the concepts. We will understand what is required to do a certain kind of an operation, right? And then we'll go back and forth with the presentation and the practical presentation and the postman, okay? So the first thing what we need to do is we need to do a get patient, right? But we don't know what is a patient, right? So get patient, right? So as we see in here, right? So when you do a get of a patient, means when you want that specific patient, you need to know that specific patient's ID. But we are fresh. We don't know any patient's ID as of now, right? So we can't get anything. So what I'll do is I will start with a search, okay? So what I'll do is I'll do a search, okay? Now this search, what I'm trying to do in search, and we'll come back to the presentation also. In FHIR search, so in FHIR search is a very very extensive capability which provides various mechanisms or various parameters with which you can actually search for a particular resource, search at the system level, search at a type level. Okay, so we'll just see like what's happening here. So here, what I want to do is I want to search for a patient whose family name is test. Okay. So all I'll do is, this is the URL that is getting constructed. Okay. And let me do, okay, first I'll show you the post and then I'll show you the get. And I do a send. And then you get the response. Okay. A search has a search set. So the response of a search is always a search set, and the search set contains the data about the patient, the data about the search results. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll not take much time on the search because we'll come back to search again. I'll just take one full URL and then I'll just go here and I'll say get. Okay, so what we said, the first thing we wanted to do was we wanted to get a known patient, right? So as I said, like the first till base R4 is the base URL. This will never change for this particular server. The next one is the type and the next one is the ID. So what it means is get patient whose ID is this on this server. So when we do a send, we actually get this. And we go here, we put it here, we put it as a language, and this is JSON, right? So we see we got a patient whose family name is test FN. What did we search? We did not search. And this is the ID of the patient, right? So we got a patient whose ID is this. So this is the ID of the patient and this is the details of the patient. So that's how you get a patient. So if you know the patient, you actually put his or her ID and you get the details, the demographics details of that particular resource. In this case, we are getting the patient, right? And if you don't know the ID itself, you can do the search, okay? So that's what I wanted to show you. Now coming back. So when we do a get, a few things to remember, and this we already saw, that the HTTP verb, then the path. Get is the HTTP verb that we talked about in the RESTful paradigm, that you use RESTful HTTP verbs and the URI. And the second one is the URI. This is the path where the resource exists. The second thing to note is the character set. And this is on a technical level that FHIR expects everything to work on UTF-8, right? But not much to worry about. It's only when you're implementing you should be worried about. Right now, the Postman client actually does it for ours. So you did get and you did this patient and you got the result. Okay. Now, what we will do is we will actually create a patient. Okay. So in creating a patient, as I said, uh, create is a type, like a type service, right? What it means is you don't have to use the ID because you don't know the ID in advance, right? So what you do is, and in HTTP, the verb to create a resource is post. So we'll use post and then the URL, okay, till the type, okay, we'll not give the ID. And then we will see what happens, right? So we go to Postman, okay. So I have already created a template here. So it's a post. We have the base, and this is the server base that did not change. And then this is the type, okay. I put the data that I need to create here, okay. So this is the data that I want to create, okay. So this you can put in anywhere. Because when you're creating a patient, you need to provide the details of the patient, right? So that's this, okay? The only thing that needs to be taken care is the content type, okay? And the content type is actually tells the server what the data that you're sending to the server to create, right, is of what type, okay? And the type, FHIR accepts types like FHIR plus JSON, FHIR plus XML, and then it supports RDF and it supports NDJSON, right? So let's make a mistake here first so that I'll show you what happens. So instead of FHIR plus JSON, I said like F plus JSON, right? It says bad request, means the content type does not work. And if you see here, it says incorrect content type. Okay. So now if you just say FHIR plus JSON, everything will work. Okay. So now things to note here. You put in the data that you need to send to the server to create a patient. You put that, you send to the server. Okay. Now in FHIR, we saw one of the things was that whenever a resource get created, it has a URI, right? So now we created a patient. Where is the URI for this patient, right? What is the location where we can find this patient? How do we find it? So for that, what you do is you just go to the headers and you see the content location. So this is your patient. So if I do a get of this patient, I should get the patient that I just created. And how we can verify? We can verify with this name, and in the post also we should have the same name. Where is the post? Oh, this is not this one. Where is the post? Yeah. So if you see, it's the same. Okay. Yeah. You can change it and you can create. Now, the other thing that to note is whenever a post request or whenever a create request gets successful, you get a 201 created response. This is the status. This is status means that your response, the server has responded with a success, and you see 201 created, right? So things to note. First, content type is important. The content type should match with the data that you're posting to the server. The post or the create request happens at the type interface, right? You don't give the ID, okay? And the location where the new resource gets created, you get that in your header, content location header, okay? Or the location header. All right.
Satyam, we have a few questions here. Would you like to take that?
Yes, let's take the questions.
Okay, I think this is regarding the patient resource. Why given name is a list?
Why given name is a less, so that we will discuss in the next session when we are talking about resources. Okay, but you can have multiple given names as per the data model.
Okay. So the next question is there any way on FHIR HL7 to validate JSON object which you have passed for create patient?
What does that mean? So we just did the validation of the content type, right?
I think this is regarding the validate JSON object.
So okay.
Probably he's
yeah,
talking about the HL7 and version 2 versus the FHIR. I feel that's what the question means.
Maybe we can take the question of like after the session because I think the answer would be the client, right? Client cannot determine, or client cannot say what the server should do, right? So client can, in its good faith, post object, right? Or post request with the data. The server determines, so before creating a resource, the server will determine whether it passes all the rules that it has set, right, or not. Right, so there are like you can do profiles and you can validate against profiles and all those things, right? But basic answer is the client cannot dictate what the server should be doing, right? So let's stop there and then we will discuss further after this session. Okay.
Okay. Next one is does REST API response always have data sent in the header parameters and not in the body of the response?
Where they have given it to some defense hospitals.
No, it's there. It's there. In the body, you have the resource. You see this? Whatever you got, you posted, right? Whatever got created, you got it here. But again, you have a prefer header. So in FHIR, if you see the spec, there is a header called prefer. Okay, so let's see that. If you go here and you search for, okay. So when you are doing a create, update, or patch, right? So you can put in a header, okay? And based on this header, you can determine what should be the response, right? If you want, so if you don't give anything, generally the servers actually give you the full patient body, means full body of the resource that they created. But if you want just minimal, you can just say prefer return minimal. And if you just want whether the operation was successful or not, you can just say return operation successful. In this case, there will be no data sent, only you will be notified that the operation was successful. So FHIR has mechanisms where you can set in to what level or to what granularity you want the return. Okay.
Okay. So the next one was, why did you post with a search?
Okay, that's a good question. I'll come back to that. So there is a session on, section on that.
Okay. Would it cause any difference in using the content type application / FHIR plus JSON or application / JSON?
The preferred is as a preferred content type that the FHIR supports is application FHIR plus JSON. That's what the specification says. But we have seen servers accepting application / JSON as well, right? But if we are going per specification, and if you see content types, these are the content types.
I think Satyam, we can do what the server is going to accepting the format as well, like without giving any details before we do any implementation.
You can.
We'll try what type of formats that server is accepting.
Yes, we can do that.
Yes.
So we'll come to that. So we are jumping ahead, right? So just go one by one. We'll cover that.
2 more questions. Would you like to take?
Yeah.
In real time, how post is achieved through a web browser?
So in web browser, I don't think there is a straightforward answer. But from the clients, right, the web applications, you can do. Right? Okay. Next one.
How to know which fields are required and which fields are optional for particular resources? For example, patient.
Read the spec. Right. So, and this we will cover in the resources section. But if you just go to that particular spec, Control T. If you just go to patient, and if you go in here, you will see what fields are required and what fields are optional. Okay, so if there are no more questions, can we go, because we have a lot to cover?
Yeah, 2 more. Shall we take it?
Okay.
Why the meta attributes has been added in the response?
All right, that's a good question. So server actually adds meta, and the meta actually, every resource has meta information, and the meta information conveys some information, some important information about the resource. Like in this case, if you see, it says what is the version of the resource. So what is, I'll just come to that. What is the version of the resource? And what is, when was the version last updated, right? So these are the two elements that the server put in, right? What it means, version ID, right? So every resource can be versioned, right? So what it means is, suppose you do an update on this patient, right? Then the patient's version will change. It will be version 2 now, right? So servers do support versions, and they actually return you what version the current version is, right? So you can actually do a history of the resource and see like what are all the versions of that particular resource, right? So meta is conveying important information, right? Housekeeping information about the resource, and that's why the server adds. If you put in something, it's most likely that it will be ignored. So server decides what should go in the meta.
Okay. We have one more question, but it looks like a use case. So I think we can take that in the Q&A session. Is it okay, Sagar?
Fine. All right. So this is what we covered right now. E tag is a HTTP tag in which you can get the version ID also. All right. So we saw this. Okay. And this is how our response came in, right? So it actually said this resource that got created, and then the history and the version of that resource, that is 1. Now, what I did was I just did a get till 1, 2, 3, 4, right? I did not add underscore history /1. Why? Because whenever you do get at the ID level, it always returns you the latest version of that particular resource. Okay. All right. Now updating a resource. So suppose you created a patient, you created created a patient, and now you want to change its date of birth, for example, right? And then how do you do it? So the first thing is, when you are doing an update, you should know whom you are updating, right? So in short, you should be knowing the ID of the resource. Okay. Then content type rules remain the same. In this case, if the update is successful, you get a 200 OK. Okay. And then you will see the version and all. So we'll just go through it and see. So now what we will do is, we got the patient, right? So where we created a patient, we got the header of it. So this is the patient, right? We will update this patient, right? So I'll just copy this patient. And I have created update created patient. Okay. So, okay. So I just remove this history because this is not required. I go to the body. Okay. And then, so this ID. So, okay, I'll show you one more thing, and where the server again validates. But first, let's change the something. Maybe this family name does not look good. So let's say FHIR Basics Session 2. Okay, I'll just give one change. You can make as many changes as possible. For example, you can make this person male, right? Okay. Now, this particular guy, right? And you'll see a server validation happening. This particular guy will not succeed. You will get an error. And you get an error. It says 400 bad requests. So again, you see a server validation happening. The client posted data, but the server validation happened and the server rejected it. Okay. So why did it reject?
So one DRDO hospital in Dagda?
ID mismatch maybe.
We'll come back. So first thing that you need to know is like, so the status request status is 400 bad request. So it's a bad request. Okay. So whenever there is an error, all right, you get a resource called operation outcome. Okay. So operation outcome is a FHIR resource which actually conveys extra information about that particular operation. Generally, it is mandatory to be used when there is an error scenario, but you can use it in
hospital sometimes
in a success or other scenarios also. Okay, so in this case, what is happening is you go to the issue, you say invalid attribute male. So this is giving the error like male is not an right attribute value. So
it's DRDO and armed forces hospitals.
Hey, please be on mute.
I think
Okay.
it's Prajesh. Please, can you be on mute?
Okay. I corrected the gender male, but still I am getting an error. Okay. And this is another level of validation that's happening. And what is happening is now it is saying the ID that you sent in the URL and the ID that is there in the request does not match. So this is another level of validation that happens. So you put the ID right, and then when you do an update, the update should succeed. If you go to the headers, you see the history and the version is 2 now, right? And this is 2. You see the E tag version is 2. W is for week. So it says week version 2. And yeah, I think we should keep it there. I will revisit it later. So you saw the resource has now 2 versions. The first version was when it was created, and the second version when it got updated, right? So if you do a get, where was the get? This is the same patient, right? So if you do a get of this guy, you should get the name changed and also the gender changed. Okay. So this is about the update. And you saw the 200 okay here. Okay. So other operations, and this we, if you want, we can get into, but if not, I will just see as is. Okay. The first one is update as create. So what happens if you, for example, you don't know whether that patient exists or not, or that particular resource exists or not, right? Right. So the safe bet is assuming that it is there, you do an update operation for it, and then the server should do, if the server does not find that particular resource, it should create that. So that is update as create. Okay. So in this update as create, what you are going to use is you're going to use the put operation. Okay. And you're actually ending up creating a resource. Okay. The other thing that you'll have to note here is when you do a create, you just do the type operation, right? You just say patient and then you put the body in there, right? But when you do a update, what we said was update needs to have the ID also, right? So here you are putting an ID which does not exist, right? So this is an interesting case. Let's see that. So
But then there is a question. Why is it case sensitive? That is, we changed male to male with M small.
Yeah, again, you have to go back to the resource, and in the resource, the gender, it says it can only accept these 4, and it is a lowercase male. Okay. So coming back, what we need to do is, let's, for example, where is upset? Okay. Okay. So here what I'll do is I'll just, so this is a random ID that I have given, right? I don't know whether this ID exists or not. Okay. One of the rule is the ID should match. So I'll put the ID here. Okay. And then identifier, I will just say session 2, and then I'm running out of family names. So I'll just say test session 2 FHIR Wessex, and gender will just keep others, and maybe date of birth we will change it to 19. Okay. Now, what we are trying to do is we are trying to update a patient which we think should be there, right? And this is the ID of that patient, right? But what we also want to instruct the server is, if the ID does not exist, just go ahead and create it, right? Again, in the headers, you have to put in the content type, right? And then you just do a send. And you get a 201 created. Notice you did a put, right? And still you got a created, right? And if you go to the headers, you will see the history 1. What it means is it's a newly created resource. You understood it, right? So when you're doing a put as create, what you are actually doing is you're telling the server that, okay, I'm trying to update this resource, but if this resource does not exist, please create it. So that is update as create, a powerful operation that will be very useful in the field scenarios. The second one is conditional create. Conditional create is if this patient does not exist, create. I'm just giving an example. So you exactly don't know whether that resource exists or not, right? But you want to create it if it does not exist. So that is conditional create. Okay. Then conditional update the same way. If the resource exists, update it. So that's the conditional update. And these are all powerful specifications that are given in the spec, in the FHIR spec. So this is nothing that somebody has to actually spec it out, right? This is already specced out, right? And that's where the power of FHIR Restful paradigm is, right? If we have to today design our own APIs, right? We'll have to think of a lot of operations. We have to think of each and every operation that we need to perform, right? But in this case, the spec actually has gone and defined a lot of operations that a particular use case would need, right? So that's where the power of a standard and power of a RESTful, FHIR Restful paradigm is, right? FHIR Restful paradigm is very, very extensive, and it has covered a lot of scenarios that will be helpful for the implementers. Similarly, there is a patch operation. Now, what happens is, for example, your resource, right, is too big. There is a lot of data, right? And you don't, for example, you're developing a mobile app or something, right? And you don't want to send a lot of data again and again, right? In that case, what you just want to update a specific field, right? You can use patch. Patch again is an HTTP verb, and then the operation is supported by FHIR. That's patch. And the last but not the least, delete. Delete is actually, it deletes the resource from the server. Okay, and delete again works as delete as the HTTP verb, and then you just give the ID of means the full URL of the resource, and it just deletes. So what we will do is, we just created this resource, right? What we will do is we will delete it. So we go here, we go, okay, and what we do is delete. So see, in delete, you don't have to do anything. You just have to put the URL and say the delete, and it will just delete it. Okay, 200 okay, operation is successful. Successfully deleted one resource. All right, that's how it is.
We have a few questions here.
Just a minute, let me finish in the interest of time.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll just see conditional create and conditional update. Okay. Or what I'll do is I have already shared with you this particular collection, right? You guys can experiment and we can discuss on Zulip that if that works, because we have a lot of other things to cover, right? So if that is okay, we will see. Okay, and we'll come back to conditional create and update if you find any issues. Okay, and then there is a conditional delete. If this resource exists, you can delete it. All right. Now, this is an important thing, transactions and batch, right? So here we were saying individual resources, right? For example, create a patient, update a patient, create an observation, right? Uh, Update a particular medication, something like that, right? But what if we have to do in a bunch, right? Like a batch operation, right? So a multiple number of resources together, right? And it can be an example. For example, you're receiving an HL7V2 message. For example, that's the best use case that I see. You receive an HL7V2 message, and you say like you got an order message, right? So my HL7 version 2, an order message actually had a lot of different segments, a lot of different information, right? So for example, it used to have a PID segment. It used to have ORM. It used to have ORC. It used to have MS. A lot of segments, right? So data is not just contained in one resource, but there is a lot of resources in which the data can be, right? So in this case, if you're converting an HL7 version 2 to FHIR, actually you're not dealing with one resource. You're dealing with many resources, right? So many resources together can be clubbed in one resource that is called a bundle resource. Okay. You can do two types of operations, that is a transaction and a batch. Okay. This transaction and the batch, since you don't know in the bundle what kind of resources are there, means you can have a patient plus an observation plus an order, all these things, right? So what you do is you send the bundle at the server level interaction, right? So you just send it to the server at the root, server root, right? And let the server decide what to do with it, okay? So that's the beauty of it. So you use bundles to actually have a collection of resources that you need to work on. You can use batch and transaction. The difference between batch and transaction is in a batch is like a group of resources, and they can actually, so you have, so for example, you want to upload hundreds of patients in the server, for example, right? So you put them in batch. All these resources are not related to each other, right? So they can each one go and update individually, right? So that's a batch. You're doing a batch operation and they are not related to each other, right? Even if one create fails, you have others that are passing, right? So that's batch, where you are just putting in unrelated items that you want to process in batch. But what happens if you want to process something in a transaction? Transaction example would be you want to create an order for this particular patient, right? So when you're creating an order, you actually need the patient information, you need the encounter information, you need the order information, right? If any of the three is not getting created, then you want that order to be not being successful, right? So a transaction bundle passes completely or fails completely. So that's the difference between a transaction and a batch. Okay, so that's written here also. A bundle of type batch is processed non-atomically, means each resource can be processed individually, whereas a transaction is processed atomically. Full transaction either passes or fails. Okay, we looked at operation outcome, and I said like operation outcome is when there is an error, you should definitely get an operation outcome, but you can get an operation outcome even for success if you request for it. And operation outcome is again a resource which actually contains the details of the error or details of what happened. All right. So now we talked about the CRUD operations, but there are a lot of things that are there which are not covered by the basic create, update, delete kind of functions, right? So for example, there was a question like, how do we validate, right? So these are like custom operations. Okay, so these operations are actually defined by FHIR, right? So, for example, if you do, you see this validator resource, you use $validate on the server, and then you send the resource, it actually gets validated. Okay, one of the most powerful operation that I have used is actually $everything. So how it works is, for example, and we will see that in live also, what happens if you want to get all the related things for this particular patient, right? So there is a patient, Satyam, and maybe he was in this hospital and he had uh, uh, 3 months worth of history, right? So he has lab tests done, he has medications, he has all, and you don't know all the things that this patient Satyam might have, right? But you want to get everything about that patient, right? How do you go about doing it? So there is an operation called dollar everything. So you just say, and this is a dollar everything works at a type level. So you just say patient slash dollar everything, and then patient, then not type level, it's an instance level, I guess, because you say patient, then ID, and then dollar everything. Then what it does is, it's for that particular patient, it gives you all the resources, and I will see that. So that's the power of it. And so just go through the spec, look at the operations, and work with it. And then anything anything that we want to discuss, we will discuss on the channel. And when we do a recap next week, we will actually look at some of the resources again. All right. So we did look at search in the beginning, right? But as I said, like, search is a very powerful mechanism that FHIR provides, right? So because most of the times we actually have to do a lot of searches before we can do any kind of operation, right? So we did the basic kind of search. We say like where the family name is test session, right? That's what the basic search we did, right? But we can actually do a lot of complex searches also. Complex searches as, like, for example, you want to get a particular patient's lab result, right? And lab results, generally you can get it in observation, right? Now, you want to get the observation for this particular patient, right? This is your need, right? You can do that kind of operation. And here is that operation, right? So if you see, first you have the base, then the type, and then question mark separates the search parameters, right? And here you are saying patient.name is Jones. Now, keep in mind, you cannot use arbitrarily anything, okay? The things that are only defined in the spec, you can use them as search parameters, or you have to define your own search parameters, okay? And we'll see some examples of search if you want, and if you have time. All right. So search parameters we have already seen, so we don't need to go through it. So now the search also can be at different types, right? And if you have to see search parameters which are common across all the resources, you can actually go to the spec and you see common parameters, you can look at it. You can see all the common search parameters which are applicable across the resources. Okay, search results, we have seen that search results are returned as a search set. Okay, so there was a question like why post, right? So search can be done using get and a post. Okay, what happens is get, when you do a get, everything is on the URL, right? So if somebody is looking at this URL, they can figure out what is happening, correct? So if you are doing a search, let's do, where is the search? Do you see a search? Okay, the first one itself. Okay. So if you do a get here, okay, and you just say, okay, you get the same result. Okay. But when you do a post, the difference happens is that your parameters are actually part of your body. So let me go here. And then, okay, in short, what happens because of that? Your parameters, the normal browser traffic cannot see it, right? So it provides you a level of obscurity or security. Apart from that, there is no difference. That the things that you can do with a get search can do with a post search. The semantics change a little bit. In the post, you have to do underscore search, right? And then you have to put all the things as URL form encoded data here. Okay. Just take a look at it, but it's the same. So you see here. So did you get the answer? The post is a little bit more, it hides what data you are sending in the search from a normal browser traffic. That's why people use post as search, right? It gives you a little bit more control over what data you are sending for search. Apart from that, I don't think there is any benefit because
Kumar, just to add one more thing, Raghu here. In get, you have a limitation, like you cannot give a lengthy search, like the content body, it has like 160 characters limitation, whereas post is used for that means a lengthy, where you want to search with 10 parameters, right?
Yes, so you can do that.
Yeah,
way, but
you can use a post. Otherwise, yeah, as you said, it is correct. There is no difference. But in post, it can accommodate more data in the body.
So that's another reason to use post. Okay. So that's all the post we had. Okay. Now let's see some search operations. Okay. And maybe this is a homework for you guys. Like just go ahead and do the homework. Okay. So for example, the question is how to search for and return all observations for a given patient using patient name, right? And this is something that we already seen multiple times. So we don't have to do anything. You just have to, okay. The benefit of this operation is execute one search operation for observation resource, and using observation and the patient search parameter, you actually get the details. Otherwise, what you will have to do is you have to actually get the patient, and then you have to actually do the search where observation.subject, and then you have to put that details, right? So it actually saves you time in the chain. It's called chain search. Okay. This is another observation, another search. For example, you want to search for an observation that was performed on a particular date, and you actually want to include the patient patient information also, right? That is also possible through FHIR search, right? And all you have to do is you have to use the underscore include operator, underscore include parameter, right? And then with that, you can actually get patient, right? Okay, last, before we get on to call, before we get on to the discussions and answering the question, there was a question that came in the beginning, and that was like, how would the client know what the server support, right? So the answer is capability statement. So whenever you go to start anything,
Easier, John, can you please unmute yourself?
So the capability statement is something that every FHIR implementation has to support. This is the minimum that a FHIR server or a FHIR application should support, right? So that's the capability. So one thing that is required by FHIR application by the spec, even if you don't support anything, if you're supporting FHIR capability statement or FHIR capability, right? You are compliant to FHIR. So just keep that in mind. So FHIR capability statement is something that is required to be supported by any FHIR compliant system. Okay. A FHIR capability statement is actually for both the client and the server because they need to know each other, right? What the capability statement actually gives is, it gives you the details of all the things that you need to work on the server with, right? For example, what is the FHIR version of the server? What are the resources supported? What are the search parameters supported? What formats does the server support, right? Whether it is a client or a server, who is the contact person? What is the server name, software name? All those informations actually you get in the capability statement. So the first operation when you are going to implement FHIR is actually, what you do is first fire the request to get the capability statement. And how do you do that? It's very simple. You just do, the first thing is server capability. So metadata is the endpoint. Okay, so always the metadata is the endpoint, right? So you have the base URL, right? You do the get operation and do the metadata, right? And you don't need anything else. And you get a lengthy document, okay, 2.2 MB. Now you see it looks like it is coming in XML, right? What if I needed JSON, right? So in the accept header, you can actually specify what kind of format you want, or I think you can also specify all right. So now you got in JSON. So so what it means is, if in the URL parameter you have specified the format, that overrides the header accept format. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So if you have to decide, right, which one the server will use, right? If you are also passing in header and you're also passing in the URL, then always the URL will take precedence. So this will be ignored. Okay. So now let's take a look at the capability statement. And okay. So if you see the capability statement, it starts with the server name and all these things. It gives you the base URL. It gives you the formats it supports. It gives you what, like in the patch, what formats it can take. And then it starts with what are the RESTful capabilities of this particular server. Okay. So, and how it goes is it actually defines resource by resource. So for this particular resource that is of type account, the server can actually do create, delete, all these operations. Okay. It can also support conditional create, conditional update, conditional delete for this particular resource. Okay. Search include. So we saw include in here, right? In the PPT, in the presentation, we saw include, right? Somewhere where we said include a patient, right? So we cannot give arbitrary include. The include should be supported by the server. Okay. And similarly, reverse include. And then actually the search parameters. So we talked about search parameters, right? What are the search parameters that the server supports? And that actually is also defined in the capability statement. So the most important operation that you need to do when you are actually working with a FHIR server or a client is actually to get their capability statement. If you get their capability statement, you actually know what all things that particular server or a client supports. And then from there, you start constructing your queries, your operations, and you start building your applications, right? So that's how we should approach. The first thing that we should do for any particular, if we are starting to work with a FHIR server, is get to know its capability. And getting to know its capability is very simple. Start to fire a get request at metadata. Okay, that's it. And you get it. Okay. And once you get this and you start working it. And you saw, right, how simple it is to actually create a patient, update a patient, and you don't need any specialized tools, right? You, for example, get, right? This get, you can actually do it in your browser also. So you go here, Control T, and you put it here, it should work. Yeah, so you get the capability statement here also. So you don't need specialized tools to actually work with FHIR applications, right? If you're doing a normal get and all, get and search, right? And a simple REST client should be able to do all the operations that you need, right? So that's the thing. So if you are going for any other particular standard, I think we have to go with a specialized tool for it. Even for HL7V2 message, we actually have to have a message parser. We used to have interface engine or a MLLP listener and all those things, right? But in FHIR, since it is web-based and since it follows the standard XML and JSON, you don't need any specialized tools. And that's where the beauty of it comes. And that's where it makes it very, very simple and easy to work with FHIR. So what we will do, and if you guys have interest, right, in the next 3 sessions, while we go, we will actually try to build some application. I will also see like how easy or difficult it is to actually build a simple application in FHIR. Okay. So that's all things that I wanted to cover for the session today. I have given you some references in this slide, right, which you can go for further reading, right, which can help you. These are apart from the FHIR specs. This is more about what is REST, what protocols, and other things. If somebody is new to it, you can just go it, and these are good tutorials, good articles. You will understand what is REST, for example. What is HTTP? What are verbs, right? All those things are listed here. So with this, I conclude today's session. The only thing that you need to keep in mind, and which no one asked the question, is like, what about security, right? Because we were able to actually work with the FHIR server, and we were able to get do anything with it, right? Create a patient, get a patient, update a patient, do anything and everything, right?
We have questions regarding that. Shall we take it?
Yeah. Which in real world will not have, right? So we will just look at it. Before we close, I just wanted to show you $everything, right? So because that was one of the things that we wanted to see, right? So for example, let's say a patient. So first let's search a patient. What is his name? I don't think Johnny will be there. Let's see. Oh, there is somebody, Johnny. Why get is an okay? Yeah. So there is only one patient, so we can't do much about it. Okay. So, but let's do a patient test. Should be a lot of things, right? Okay. So, for example, let's take an example of this patient. Okay. And we want to get everything about this patient, right? So all we need to do is $. So if you do it, you get all the resources that are there related to this particular patient. Okay. I don't know what is there in this. Let's see. For this particular patient. JSON is not working. Oh, it's an XML. Why is it an XML? Because I said okay. So we just did an operation on FHIR patient, right? So you just said the patient endpoint, and we just gave this ID. So ideally, it should have returned me only that particular patient. But since we put $everything operation, what it returned is it did not return just the patient. Okay. It actually returned the patient's encounter. It has the patient has 3 encounters. So it actually returned patient plus the encounter, right? So if the patient had more resources, it would have returned those also, right? So that's what I'm saying. I just wanted to demonstrate that these are operations which are specifically defined in the spec, which helps you do a lot more. Okay, I think let me stop the share. And let me stop the recording.
Satyam, before you stop that, could you please address the security aspect? How is authentication done?
All right. So security is, so FHIR spec does not talk about security. Okay. So what it says is you apply the standard web security that you want to apply to the normal web application, right? So that's how it is. And there is a section on FHIR security. The spec says that. If you're seeing my screen, I can share my screen again. Let me share my screen. Okay. So you can use OAuth. That's the thing that people are using. Okay. And the other specific other things that they are saying is just a minute. Let me go to FHIR. Go to. So here only, if you go and do security. Okay. Okay. So these are some security considerations that you can apply. Okay. But the spec does not say like what kind of security you should be doing. Okay. So you should be at basic, like what you are doing for any web application, you should be doing HTTPS. You should be doing authentication and authorization. FHIR has some resources that you should be using, like the audit resource, like which audits like what's happening, who worked on what, and then you should be doing input validation and other things. What you do for a normal web application, you should be doing for FHIR security. Right. In addition, you can have audit and provenance, and in metadata also there are certain security tags or the flags that you can use. But those are again not the security like authentication authorization. This is more about what you should be doing with that particular resource, that tags you can use. Right. So that's how it is.
Thank you, Satyam.
Recording stopped.